Joining me now is someone who was in the White House on January 6, 2021, who witnessed the violent ramifications of Donald Trump's words up close, and who decided to resign her position on that day. Former White House Deputy Press Secretary for the Trump administration, Sarah Matthews, joins me. Thank you for coming back. I know we've talked before. I've been really looking forward to talking with you. Let me start with the comments from this weekend. What did you hear? I mean, you worked for Trump for some time. You obviously resigned, as I noted, on after January 6th. But he said it's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That will be the least of it. What did you hear when you heard that?
Trump oftentimes speaks in these kinds of incoherent, vague sentences. And so that allows people to draw to the conclusion that they want to fit their own narrative. But I think when you look at this sentence, obviously the Trump campaign is out there saying, of course, he's talking about the auto industry. But then why would he use a phrase like that's going to be the least of it immediately afterward? That alludes to something more. And in my eyes, yeah, sure, he could have been talking about the economy. But I think when you're looking at who the messenger was of this message, this is a man who helped incite a deadly insurrection on our nation's capital. So when he's using terms like bloodbath, it's really hard for me to give him the benefit of the doubt.
And he also had a number of phrases I just outlined in that same speech that would be concerning to anyone listening, including applauding insurrectionists and having the national anthem sung by many January 6th rioters. I would also note that he was for the auto industry going bankrupt. So that's important for people to remember. I wanted to ask you, one of the things that struck me is that many of the same people who have been working overtime to kind of explain and put into context his comments have not really seemed to take an issue with the fact that he has been calling insurrectionists hostages, saying immigrants are not people. He saluted people, which is normally reserved for people in the military, as you know, convicted for their role in the insurrection. What do you make of that context here? The kind of overspinning and explanation of one comment when everything else seems okay.
Yeah, exactly. This one comment they're saying is overblown, but it does follow a proven track record of these kinds of unhinged comments from him and an increasingly violent rhetoric and apocalyptic rhetoric almost. When he says things like there's going to be death and destruction if he's charged in these criminal cases, that is, I think, a warning call to his supporters. He's telling them kind of marching orders almost. And we saw this happen in the lead up from the election in 2020 to January 6th. Where he told them to come to the Capitol. He said it was going to be a wild day, that we needed to save our country. So he's putting these kinds of messages out there, hoping that they'll act on them.
As you've said, you're so familiar with his pattern of speech and his language and how he kind of injects things that don't always make sense. And you saw that leading up to January 6th. Do you watch this? I mean, it must be difficult to watch for you personally.
I think it is difficult to watch. It's disheartening because obviously I went and served in the Trump administration because I believed in the policies. I didn't always necessarily agree with everything he said or did, but it's really hard for me now to look at people that I admired, politicians and former colleagues of mine who still are working for him, who are still supportive of him, because I think that he's just gotten increasingly erratic and unhinged in his behavior since losing the election. And I couldn't imagine going to support him or even cast a vote for him given everything that's transpired, especially when we look at something like January 6th and the stolen election claims. He's never shown any remorse for what happened that day and instead treats it almost like a celebratory occasion. I mean, he, as you noted, plays an alternate national anthem at his rallies. And at the beginning of the rallies, they ask the attendees to please rise for the unfairly treated January 6th hostages, as he calls them. And that's just completely absurd. And so it is really disappointing to think that I once supported this man and believed in his agenda and to see the type of things that he's pushing now.
And the reason I talked about Maricopa County and the events of last month is because you can see people watching and hearing his language and echoing it in the way that we saw leading up to January 6th, which is what's so alarming. I want to ask you about former Vice President Pence, because he said that Donald Trump calling January 6th insurrectionists hostages is unacceptable. Everyone has not said that, certainly. He also said he wouldn't be endorsing Donald Trump. I wanted to get your reaction to those comments and sort of what you think the impact might be or might not be, I guess.
I mean, I honestly got emotional when I heard these comments. I think I know Mike Pence to be someone who is a man of faith, a good man who only wants what's best for this country. And I think that it took a lot of courage for him to come out and say that he would not be endorsing Donald Trump. I mean, look, it's unprecedented. No vice president has ever said that their own former boss is not fit to serve. And he knew, like I knew when I spoke out against Trump, that kind of effectively ends your career in Republican politics. And I think he knew that by saying he wasn't going to endorse him, that he might have been kind of signing away any future that he wanted in Republican politics. And so I admire him for coming out and saying that. I wish more Republicans would have a backbone like him and follow suit, because I know that so many Republicans privately say these things and believe Donald Trump is a disaster and unfit to serve, and that January 6th is a horrific day for our country, but they would never publicly say these things.
Do you think he's going to stick with it?
Do I think? I hope that Mike Pence sticks with it. Obviously, I think he has said that he won't endorse him right now, but I think that it would be weird for him to go back on his word then and say he's not going to endorse him and then flip. So I think that it would make the most sense for him to stick to it. He did the right thing on January 6th, and I hope that he'll continue to do the right thing and not endorse him. And I don't think that I necessarily expect him to say he's going to vote for Joe Biden per se, but I
don't think Joe Biden's expecting that either.
Exactly. But I do think that it is a huge statement for a own vice president to say that he is not going to support his former boss. And so I hope that he does stick to his word on that.
Sarah Matthews, I really appreciate you joining me again. I hope you'll join me again in the coming months as we're all trying to make sense of Donald Trump and the election and what people should understand about it. Really appreciate you taking the time. So let me start here. I mean, the RNC has already filed dozens of what they call election integrity lawsuits, including one just today targeting voter rolls in Nevada. They did one last week in Michigan. The apparatus under Trump's hand-picked leadership appears to be really prioritizing these lawsuits that limit ballot access and support these conspiracies. It seems very, very blatant to me. I mean, they're all in charge of the RNC. Do you see this as different, more alarming, or how would you categorize it than what we saw in the lead up to 2020?
Yeah, unfortunately, in 2020, we largely caught them flat-footed, and Donald Trump, I think, surprised his own team by coming out against vote by mail, and then had the Keystone Cops operation run by the likes of Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and Sidney Powell. The bad news is that since January 6, 2021, rather than recoiling from the big lie, the Republican Party has refined it into not only a messaging campaign, not just an electoral campaign, but a litigation strategy. So here are a couple of numbers that should chill everyone. The fact is, in 2021, the year after Donald Trump was, tried to overturn the election through an insurrection, 25% of all the anti-voting litigation that was filed was brought by the Republican Party and other Republicans. In 2022, that number jumped to 52%. Last year, it was 68%. 68% of all of the bad litigation going on in this country was being sponsored by the Republican Party or its candidates. And already, as you point out, this year, we have seen a flood of new efforts. Ronna McDaniel was fired not because she couldn't raise money, not because she wasn't Trumpy enough, but because Donald Trump wanted someone who was able to be more effective at making it harder to vote and easier to cheat. And that's what they're going to try to do in 2024.
It seems to be the primary focus of the RNC. And it's important for people to remember, usually party committees are organizing voter outreach and funding state parties and trying to reach out to people. So you've talked about all these lawsuits, which, of course, your focus. I mean, Nevada, Michigan, we mentioned. Are there other tactics that are more under the radar or that aren't getting as much attention that you think people should be aware of?
Absolutely. Look, I have said that we're not going to solve the problems of democracy through the courts. The courts play an important role of backstopping democracy. But fundamentally, what we have right now is a political party that knows it cannot win a majority of the popular vote. In fact, it won't even try. But it can't win if everyone is able to vote who is eligible. So the biggest threat to democracy and free and fair elections this fall is what I have called election vigilantism by conservatives and Republicans. What do I mean by that? Well, we saw it in the run-up to 2022, where you saw conservatives with flak jackets and body armor with video cameras staking out drop boxes in Maricopa County, trying to intimidate people simply to return their ballots. We saw unprecedented levels of voter challenges. This is right-wing efforts to misuse voter data to try to prevent lawful people from being able to be registered and vote. We saw 364,000 Georgians challenged in the 2021 election and another 100,000 challenged last year. We have seen these kinds of widespread efforts to try to intimidate election officials and intimidate voters and to try to dissuade them from voting, because that is the Republican playbook. And it is upon all of our responsibilities to fight back against that this fall.
So part of this is obviously preparing, it seems, though you tell me, to challenge or question the outcome of the election in November, especially if Joe Biden wins. What is that going to look like? What should people be prepared to see?
Look, I mean, anyone who thinks that Donald Trump was talking about the auto industry has been living in a cave for the last few years. Donald Trump showed us what he would do in 2020. He would lie. He would spread misinformation. He would coddle up with every bad dictator in the world. Okay. Then when that wasn't enough, he would abuse the legal system. And when that wasn't enough, he would inspire a violent insurrection in the nation's capital to prevent the certification of the election. That's what he was willing to do in 2020. Well, Jen, now he faces a long prison sentence. Right. He faces a existential crisis to himself and his freedom. He will do anything in 2024. And so we should expect to see the tactics that he and the RNC and others will engage in around election intimidation, voter harassment, trying to try to intimidate election officials, replace good election officials with big lie adherents, and ultimately, if that is not enough in the aftermath of the election, we have to be ready for him to, as he promised from the stage just the other night, have there be widespread violence.
I mean, Mark Elias, there's so much litigation we got to be watching. I hope we can have you back on many times before the election. Thank you so much for joining me this evening.